Hi, I'm Suneera and I'm a mom of two, a daughter of an immigrant, and an unlikely entrepreneur who went from scaling an idea to $1 billion business. Yes, $1 billion business. Along the way, I learned that less than 2% of female founders ever hit 1 million in revenue, and I became obsessed on a mission to change that. I believe that there is so much gatekeeping in business knowledge, and that we as female entrepreneurs should be learning from other female founders and leaders who have broken the statistics. Since I never went to CEO school, I've had to learn it all the hard way, but you shouldn't have to, because we believe that you deserve to have it all. And honestly, nothing bad happens when women make more money. Grab a seat because class is officially in session. Welcome to CEO School. Hi everyone, this is Suneera and welcome to CEO School. I am so excited for today's episode for so many different reasons. One, it is the new year, and I know this episode is probably going to air in February, but it's January right now in studio when we're recording. So this is actually our first official studio recording day of the year. And it's my favorite place to be is at Hi Hello Lab Studio in Orlando, where I get to record this amazing podcast with our team. And so everyone's here. We're just so pumped to all be together to start recording this year's amazing guests and shows. And we're not going to disappoint you. Today's guest, I'm so pumped for, especially at the start of the new year. It's going to be so much about mindset and resiliency and all the things that we need as entrepreneurs to succeed this year. And with that, I'm so excited to welcome a dear friend, Dr. Neeta Bhushan, who is a mother, wife, entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur, and world-renowned expert performance coach. She's co-founded Global Grit Institute and Dharma Coaching Institute, and she's helped thousands of change makers, high achievers, and burnt out professionals pivot into careers they love and create lives where they thrive. She was actually a cosmetic dentist and then became an acclaimed transformational speaker, emotional health advocate, and a best-selling author. And she has a new book that launched that I literally am so excited to get my hands into. That's called That Sucked, Now What? And so we're going to be talking about the book and her life experience of overcoming so much adversity, including being orphaned at a young age, surviving an abusive marriage with domestic violence, and tons of loss. And she is literally just so brave, so resilient, and she's going to teach us our ways of how she's overcome all of that suck and turned it into this beautiful empire that she has. And she's helping, thousands of female entrepreneurs along the way, also through her podcast, The Brave Table. So Neeta, Dr. Neeta, welcome to CEO School.
Wow, Suneera. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that intro. Whew, that was a lot.
I'm so excited to have you. Just even us conversing 5 minutes before the show, I'm like, I just want all your vulnerability, this episode. I know I'm going to gain so much of it today. I'm going through a lot of transition in my life currently, and transition can feel sucky, even if it's good, even if it's what you choose. And so I'm excited to hear about That Sucked, Now What? So let's dive into it. If you could just tell us a little bit about your background, take us there, and then let's deep dive into the book and your expertise.
Yeah. Wow. So I think that, my biggest transition and sucky moment that I had to, come to terms with, and that really has brought me to kind of connecting the dots in all stages of my life. It started out when I felt like I was at the top and the pinnacle of what I called success at the end of my 20s. I was one of the first people to graduate my dental school class, and one of the only females, actually few females in my class, that would then go into starting her own practice. And so that became the 7-figure business. And I thought it was all right, I'm not even 30. I have all of these accolades. I've worked really hard, etc. And I just remember that there was something off. And there was something off. And I kept achieving, I kept all of these things, yet internally, my life was in shambles. I had gotten married a year and a half before, and I felt like the biggest fraud. I felt like the biggest lie. And you know this, Suneera, in our cultural backgrounds, divorce is definitely not something that um, is celebrated. And so I actually, December 31st, 2011, I had to make the hard decision not only to just see my reality and where I was, but I was in a really dark place. I had to make a decision overnight that I would leave this marriage, that it would be the last time I would be struck in the face, and that I would face my demons and my fears. And that was letting everybody know that this was my reality, that it wasn't picture perfect, that I was living this lie. And I think first and foremost that I thought I was going to let everyone down, especially the 10 team members that I had in my, amazing dental office. But truthfully, I was emotionally a wreck. I was living in this fear that what would the world think of me? Because there was so much to unpack, just even in that statement. And truthfully, I hadn't really worked through the tremendous loss that I had faced pretty much a decade earlier. And that was in my adolescence and as a teenager. From 16 to 19, I lost my mom, my brother, and my dad to all different medical diseases. And so I started my 20s with this chip on my shoulder, which I talk about in the book, where anytime somebody's been through some sort of adversity, you're like trying to prove to the world. And I felt like I needed to prove to the world that I belonged, that I didn't need to be pitied because I had all this loss. And by the way, I was also raising my youngest brother who was 5 years younger than me. So it was a lot of pressure until I had no place to put all of those repressed emotions and feelings, and it just came bursting out at the seams, so much so that January 1st, 2012 was like a ton of bricks just alleviated my shoulders, because that point was the day that I said, all right, this is me living life on my own terms. And it charted this whole new path for 7 years, that I would just release everything. And I mean everything: real estate investments, my condo, another condo that I grew up in, and even selling my dental practice, to really live a life that was on my terms, and to honestly even focus on healing. Because I think so much of it is we're in this go, go, go mode, and we don't stop until there is something that, that causes us to make that full transition, where we have to start over again fully.
Wow. I mean, I have just goosebumps right now just listening to that story. That's a lot of loss and heartache. And I don't even have words to, I'm sorry that you went through that. I mean, what heartache. And I mean, I've just lost a parent at a very adult age. And I'm still a hot mess from that, just from losing one parent.
Yeah.
And that loss has been so hard for me. I can't imagine being in a world where you lose your whole family back to back, being in a marriage that is abusive, and putting a face on to, like, you know, be at your dental practice because you have a team that you're supporting, and just then making that decision to say, hey, I'm going to turn everything off and go focus on you. That's so brave. And I applaud you for making that decision, because that's a really tough thing to do in such a low moment in your life. And I'm honestly just so grateful that it's worked out well for you, and that, you've overcome that, and you're going to help so many others overcome that. How did you overcome that? So what happened next in your story,
Yeah.
deciding to, like, completely do this reset?
Yeah, and I think, Suneera, when we're faced with, and I'm so sorry about your parent, that's it's just, I think it's hard at any age for loss, and I think that even in the season of life that we are in, we are going to have, elderly aging parents, and that's just kind of the season of life, right? And we still have our ambitions, we still have our children, and that's kind of where my subtitle, How to Embrace the Joy in Chaos and Find Magic in the Mess. I mean, a lot of my early upbringing was chaotic. I mean, both my parents had cancer, not at the same time. But because I was so exposed to a lot of those chaotic environments, I grew up with a ton of hustle mentality. I mean, there were times in my adolescence, I had to work 3 jobs, just to bring things to the table. My dad was in, deep depression. And so there was a lot of those early aspects that really added to my resiliency, which I do talk about in the book. It's a 4-part process of how to actually build your bounce factor. But, fast forward into kind of the early years of trying to really pick up my pieces of my life, and you kind of hit it on the nail. Not very many people acknowledge that. But yeah, having to go through a lot of loss and take care of 10 people in your practice. And one of the things I had to do in my own leadership was, for such a long time, because I was younger, I wasn't even 30. Most of my team members were probably a decade older than me. I was so afraid of that imposter showing up that I did not want to let anybody in to my world of chaos. But I remember vividly there was a time where I had packed all of my things that I took from my 5-story home and my fancy SUV, and I was in the back of the building that I owned. It was just all of these things, but I was so afraid to tell people that, hey, I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight, because I was so in my head of this thing that we're taught when we're younger. What would people think? And so much
Wow.
so that I had to then go first. And I remember there were patients all in the waiting room. People were in chairs, suction, everything. I mean, it was hysterical now that I look back. But I remember I couldn't do it anymore. I like stood up out of my seat, brought everybody into, we had a little lunchroom back then. And I said, hey, listen, I am going through the deepest, darkest days of my life, and I'm going to need support from you. I don't know. There is going to be uncertainty. I don't know if I'm going to keep this open, but I am going to need full support, because this is what's happening. I'm going through a divorce right now. And as soon as I let everybody in, it just changed. Everything shifted overnight. People took, the leadership just started shifting. They're like, I got you, Dr. Neeta, you do whatever you need. So, I mean, it allowed me to start diving into all different forms of healing, right? It fully shifted the trajectory, because I started taking more time off, yet our revenue in our dental business kept growing and growing, 20%, 30%. We extended it. I mean, it was massive. But what it allowed me to do was, I needed to recreate a whole foundation for myself, a whole community for myself, because I had left a lot of the things that I knew. And I think many times, for anybody going through transition, we start to create our own reality, and in doing so, we have to say yes to the things we would probably normally say no to. So I said yes to doing improv. I mean, so random. It came like just a girlfriend's like, Neeta, like, you need to just get out and like just start to have fun again. And I'm like, there's no way, and it was the greatest thing, because guess what? It led me to then do a few stand-up comedy classes. Not that I was going to ever do stand-up, but just to evoke this sense of play. And I talk about it in the book, how sometimes we're just so caught up in the suck of our mess that it keeps us stuck in our suck, instead of taking
Oof.
those baby
I love
steps
that.
forward. Yeah.
Oh my God, I have so much right here. I love that you shared that. I think the first big takeaway for me here is that, you know, we all believe that we're so alone in whatever we're going through. And that moment that you just allowed your team to share, like, this is what I'm going through. Everybody stepped up. Like, you weren't alone. Even though you thought you were alone, you weren't alone. And just asking for help is something that we as women, I see this time and time over again. Mothers, entrepreneurs, wives, like every title ever, but we feel like we have to take every single thing on for ourselves, and we're not allowed to ask for help. And when we do ask for help, we are given help, and there's nothing wrong in asking for help. Yet we have this like such setback in what are people going to think if I ask for help? Or I'm overburdening somebody. Like there's this huge narrative that we play out just to raise our hands to say, hey, I'm going to need a little help right now, because everybody needs help, right? Everybody needs help. And when you ask for it, everybody was there, and it actually turned out so much better. Your business actually flourished and grew, and you got to take that time to heal that you needed.
Oh, yes, and it even started like, I started 4 different enterprises as a result of it. I started, a nonprofit. I started to dabble in angel investing, which took me to then the Bay Area and spending more time with VCs. And, people always ask, "How the heck did you end up in the Bay Area with startup founders?" And I said, "Well, because I repeatedly said yes to new things. I repeatedly became the smallest fish in the room because of course it was cathartic because I was also doing my own healing. It was also getting me out of the shell that I was so accustomed to in medicine and dentistry, to see, hey, there's a whole world out here outside of medicine. And slowly and steadily, I started to learn from other people. And I was so focused on leadership because I wanted to know how I could still keep that dental practice while doing other things, which then led me to speaking at Google when I wasn't even thinking that I was going to be the speaker, and sharing tips. And so that, these small incremental steps of what I say yes, and trusting your team, which means then to start letting go. I mean, there was a time I was only there twice a month at this point, and we were still doing the same numbers. And so it was fascinating, but I think also that authenticity of ourselves when we feel like we cannot let the world in, and that's how we can actually begin to scale. And in that time of my life, I was so ready to then say, all right, I need to close a chapter of my life. And that's when I realized, I said, I'm spending way more time on the West Coast, and I'm spending way more time now telling people how to spend less time in their businesses, as professionals. First it started doctors and lawyers and chiropractors, et cetera. But then my love for diving into and really learning from people who were creating businesses out of nothing and then getting full funding for it. And what they didn't have was that emotional capacity. And that is step number 2 of this bounce factor framework of you're building that emotional capacity to weather some of the tough storms that any business goes through, just because we have human experiences in our life that may catch us off guard.
How do you build that? I wrote down here audacious resilience, right? That's something that you talk about in your book. Like, how do you kind of prepare yourself as an entrepreneur? I think, here at CEO School, we talk a lot about scale, right? And a huge part of scale is actually letting go, right? It's us getting out of our day to day, not being in the business, all the tacticality of it. But I love that you talk about in your, like, in the framework, it specifically has so much to do with your emotional resiliency. So if you could, how do we build that emotional resiliency? Because the life of an entrepreneur is a fucking roller coaster, right? It is literally all day long. It's like you're getting punched in the face, and then you still have to show up, and then it's like the highest of highs and the lowest of lows all in a single day. Like that is what like a Monday could look like and a Tuesday could look like. And so for me, I would say, like, in my experience, I didn't have any practices that allowed me to have any sort of like resiliency, besides the fact that I just had to like keep getting through it. And then you get better at embracing what comes, and then you do it all over again. And so for me, I just kind of got used to it. And I think that's what built my resiliency, was probably experience. But we have lots of new entrepreneurs, right, that are here. And like, plain fact and simple, you are going to go through tough times. There is no perfect journey. There is no such thing as overnight success. There is no such thing. Like, every journey looks like this in its own capacity. So for those entrepreneurs, so those women, what do you have to say to help them build that audacious resiliency?
So, absolutely. I mean, I think that for any new entrepreneur, even seasoned entrepreneur, I mean, at this point, in one of my businesses, Global Grid Institute, we service the mental health and the emotional health of entrepreneurs. and CEOs. And I think that the biggest thing that we forget is that we're human. When we're building a business, we think that our personal life and our professional life need to be so completely different. And take into account just my own journey and story and what I've shared, the soonest I allowed both of those realities to mix, because that was an identity that I had and that I had to let people in, everything shifted. There was no, I have to be more masculine in this role and act like a man and lead like a man. Because when I was doing that, I wasn't able to allow myself to connect with people that who were working with me and who were really needing that support from my vulnerability. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when I talked about your emotional capacity as one of the pillars of building your bounce factor. And the reason why I call it your bounce factor is because in Latin, when we talk about resilience, we're not just talking about mental toughness. The actual root of the word means to bounce. Resiliere means to bounce. So
Wow.
that means you have the agility, you have the flexibility. And in business, we are going to have these tough times, and we're going to try different things that sometimes won't work, that will fail, and it might flop. But as they say, these are all data points to get you to the next thing that you're going to test. And so why not then, the biggest thing that we do, especially as female entrepreneurs, is we judge our own thoughts. We judge our emotions. And it's not just the thoughts that we're thinking of, but it's really what we're feeling. Because if we want to scale and scale our company and get those numbers, well, how are we going to feel when we actually get there? How do we want our
Mm.
team to feel when we actually get there? Do we want to feel burnt out, or do we want to feel energized? And I think that is the biggest thing that we take for granted. And also, when something does not go our way or as planned, how does that make us feel? Do we feel defeated? Do we feel hopeless? What do we do as a result of that? Do we still bury? Do we shove it under a rug? Where are those patterns coming from, even in our own leadership? And to actually take note, and the first big part of this is to kind of build that radical self-awareness. And I'm sure you talk about this so much, but it can even look like, well, what do I need right now today? What is actually going to make me feel nourished so that I can take on all of these different tasks? And if I'm having a rough mental health day or rough day, am I just going to charge forth through it? Or am I going to actually be compassionate for myself and say, you know what? Yeah, this, even just acknowledging it will shift your energy of what you're actually calling in. Um, and so that's that second piece. But the third big piece is, are you actually inviting good stress into your life?
Okay.
What is your
Pause right now. I'm gonna pause you because you just said the word stress and you said the word good together, and I would never put those things together. Is there a such thing as good stress? What
Oh
is
my
good stress, Dr. Neetha? Because
Okay.
I
Yes.
don't know this formula and I need it right now.
Okay.
Because all the
Okay.
stress that I have is pretty fucking stressful.
I know every time I say that, people are like, wait, no, I don't want that. So hear me out for a second.
Okay.
When we are doing something completely new, we're building something, we're building our team, it is going to
Mm.
take a lot of that energy out of us, and call it grit, call it tenacity, call it the shit sometimes we don't want to do. And like you just said, you said you learned at every step of the way, and through your experience you got better at it.
Yeah.
So when I used to look at every deal that would come through, whether or not I was going to add, certain capital to that project or not, I would look at, well, what was their risk profile? What were they actually, and how were they as a human, right? How many failures did they have in the past? I mean, you all have probably heard this before, right? But that is a seasoned entrepreneur in many ways. Your ability to bring about good stress, and physically it can look like, the simplest example of this could look like taking a cold shower. Who the heck likes to take a cold shower? Nobody. But what are some of those benefits to that, right? We know longevity, inflammation reduction, you sleep better, etc. Do we want to do that? No, none of us want to jump into an ice bath, right? So that's one example. But what about leaning into hard conversations? Many times when I talk to CEOs, they're like, I'll have somebody else do that. Or that's like the
Yeah.
hardest thing to lay somebody off, right? But what if we built that muscle and started exposing ourselves to the things that we may not be the best at, but it grows so that when we do have to have a hard conversation, we're not ignoring it like the plague.
Okay, I get it now. And I think something else that when you said the word good stress, now that I'm like understanding your variation of it, like, entrepreneurship is hard and you have to go through some of the, like, you have to go through it, right? Like, there are things that you just have to go through. But when you're passionate about it, like, you're willing to endure that level of, like, it's not going to happen overnight. So even the level of stress that comes with building a business, like, it might be stressful in that moment. But when I look back, I'm like, man, that was good stress, right? Because, like, those are good problems to have as well, right? To, like, be having the opportunity to build something and putting your blood, sweat, and equity and time and like into that was stressful. However, overall, it worked out well. So it was good. So I like this concept of good stress, and it's an amazing way to think about the suck. Lastly, before we close out, something that you said earlier is, suck is gonna happen, right? And it's us getting stuck in that suck.
Mm.
And honestly, for me, so Sal and I have this like this trick, I guess, or like this thing that we do when there's something super, super shitty. We allow ourselves for 24 hours to like feel the suck, because if you don't feel it, then you never like actually ever go through it. So
Yes.
it frustrates me when people are like, "Oh, I'm fine. Everything's fine." Like, it's okay not to be fine. Acknowledge that it's not fine. I don't want anybody to tell me it's going to be okay. Be positive, like all the bullshit, like embrace that suck. But we give ourselves like a time frame and we're like, we got to feel it. This was super shitty. And sometimes it's like you didn't get like a small example is like you worked so hard for 9 months on getting a contract or like a client. And it, at the they chose another vendor, whatever it is, something super simple like that. But you spent like a year chasing this thing and you didn't end up getting that outcome. And you give yourself that 24 hours to be like, that was really shitty. We just spent a year of time and resources, et cetera, or you didn't get whatever the suck is. Giving yourself that appropriate amount of time to feel super shitty, have that, however you blow off your steam and have that, that suck. And then it's like, okay, acknowledging that sucked. We got through that suck. And now we have to like, bounce, like resilient, like we got to bounce back and we're going to go find the next one. And so we have this rule, we call it like our 24 hour suck. And not everything is 24 hours, but the appropriate amount of time to go through your suck, because it is important to feel that suck.
Oh my gosh.
What are your thoughts there?
Oh my gosh. Yes, absolutely. I have, two different emotional release practices here in the book that, and people can use the 24 hours. I love, because sometimes it does really suck. And the worst thing that you could do as a founder is bypass those emotions, because they are valid and they're real. And it did fucking suck that you didn't get that contract, or the thing that you worked on didn't go as planned. And so I love that you're allowing yourself. I usually, in one of the practices, especially if it's through the day, you're like, if you only have the 15 minutes or even the 2 minutes, but there's a whole body process of like, so you're not ruminating in it for that day, but you're allowing yourself to feel it and feel it fully, like in your body. Sometimes we can feel it in our gut, where our gut is feeling really off, or we get tension headaches, or we're clenching our jaw because we're so upset and angry. But those feelings are valid, and it reminds us that we're human and that we really did care about that thing. So absolutely. But then also, let's now then move forward. And what's that now what? And sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get to that now what, and to give yourself that grace. There's so many other practices that I use in terms of releasing the anger, releasing the rage, because many times we're grown up thinking that that wasn't a safe emotion to express, whether it was in
Yeah.
our family or our upbringing. So we don't, we don't actually experience it, but then guess who feels it? Oh, your team members. Why? Because you're passing on the resentment that you're holding in and you're suppressing in. And so you have that passive aggressiveness, right? And many times it's because, well, we haven't really stated how that made us feel, that I'm actually feeling really shitty right now, or I'm actually feeling really sad or really defeated or really stressed out or really overwhelmed. Many times when we actually can share that piece, that's already releasing some of that steam. It's kind of like taking a pressure cooker and, taking the top off to just let a little bit of that release out in whatever way. And of course, there's so many more of those tips inside of the book as well.
I'm so excited. I cannot wait to read That Sucked, Now What? Because, life sucks and it's amazing at the same time, but we've got to embrace that suck and, find that joy. And I think that this book is going to resonate with so many readers. I know I'm really excited about the tips that you've already shared. Where can we find it? How can we support you? And where do we get our copies?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, go ahead, and I have a super special bonus for all of the listeners
Oh,
today
awesome. Thank you.
at CEO School. So when you go to thatsuckednowwhat.com and grab a copy, you also get this digital 44-page guide. We've already brought it to so many different organizations, and people are doing it with their teams. And it actually goes through some of the exercises, kind of like how to build your bounce factor, et cetera, how to actually have your personal observation check-in so that you're not ruminating and holding things in. But it's also really great to see the bounce factor in some of your other team members so that you actually know, how to relate to one another, especially going through some of those tough moments that if we're inevitably going to go through. And I think it just builds more of that bond with your team. So at thatsuckednowwhat.com, and you'll get that for free when you order the book.
Amazing. We'll be linking everything in the show notes. And I know I follow you on Instagram. We've been Instagram friends for so long, and I love following your journey. So you could follow Dr. Neeta at Neeta Bhushan, and we'll link that also in our show notes. Dr. Neeta, thank you so much for such a wonderful episode today. I love the reminder just kicking off this year to embrace what's ahead because it's going to come, and to find our bounce back. And that's truly what life is about. It's not about falling down. It's about how you get up. So thank you so much for being here today at CEO School. And to all our listeners, if you enjoyed today's episode, definitely leave us a review. This is how we grow the show. Drop us a review, screenshot it, share it on Instagram, tell your friends about CEO School, and we'll be sending out swag to our amazing, amazing listeners. So tag me, tag CEO School, and our teams will be reaching out. We love all of you. I hope this year is our best year yet. I will see you next week at CEO School. Thank you for tuning into today's show. If you loved it, leave us a review. We are so proud to bring you authentic conversations, game changer expert guests, and valuable content on and offline. The best compliment you can give us is by screenshotting today's show and tagging us on Instagram at CEO School and at Suneera Madani. We are obsessed with swag, so don't be surprised if we want to send you some. Thanks for tuning into class today, and remember, nothing bad happens when women make more money.